Hey, happy Wednesday. Got my cup of coffee. The 60th anniversary mug we have keeps it hot through a counterculture. They're offering that at the local grocery now, kind of one I used to mail order, so got some counterculture. And just for a little bit of a boost, a shot of espresso, maybe a double shot. Let's just leave that between you and me. But I've got my pick-me-up, and I appreciate you joining me this Wednesday morning as we try to work our way through the story of the Bible. We come to a very interesting one today. We're going to jump ahead a little bit. We're still in the story of Abram, or now Abraham. A lot has happened in these chapters since we first meet him in chapter 12 and the covenant God has made. He now has a son, Isaac, the son of promise. Now, there are some ups and downs along the way. Abram is not perfect. By any means, Abraham is not perfect. He makes mistakes. He makes many of it. But we see one here that's particularly interesting because in Genesis chapter 22, there's a key moment for Abraham that pictures for us something even more important further down the line. And this is where I think the beauty of the Bible being all tied together and why we can see kind of that big overarching story as being so important. In Genesis 22, Abraham has a son, Isaac. He's grown up. If you remember, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born, and his wife was 90, so he's getting up in years. He maybe had wondered, is this ever going to happen, as we talked about last week? But it has happened. He has the son of promise, the beginning of the heirs as numerous as the stars in the sky. But in chapter 22, God asked Abraham to do something. Now, this is a request that's tough. It's hard to explain. It's hard to accept. But the story that we find here, the account that we have, is God asked Abraham to take his son, his only son Isaac, whom he loves, and sacrifice him. Now, as an aside, God is against human sacrifice, against child sacrifice. Child sacrifice was a normal part of many of the ancient Near Eastern religions. The faith that comes out of the Hebrew Bible is not in that. And so this is one of those, that's why it's hard to sense what's going on here. But as we read through the story, we realize this is a key test for Abraham now, because he surprisingly and willingly and almost immediately answers and starts the journey. Maybe just like when we first met him, that God says, leave your land, leave your father, leave your homeland and go. Abraham went. And here the same thing. When God says, sacrifice your son, Abraham gets up the next morning and starts the journey with Isaac. He goes a ways and then he leaves his servants behind, and it's just he and Isaac headed up to this place of sacrifice. He tells Isaac, we're going to make a sacrifice together. And along the way, Isaac he's probably a young teenager, maybe mid-aged teenager. We don't know exactly how old. It doesn't lay it out, but he's not 5, he's not 4. He's a strong young man at this point, and he looks around and he asks a very penetrating and kind of a heartbreaking question of his father. He says, Dad, as I'm looking, we're on the way to make a sacrifice. I see the wood, I see the fire, I see all the things. The only thing we're missing, Father, is the lamb itself, the sacrifice that will be offered. And Abram says to his son, he says, don't worry, the Lord himself will provide a sacrifice. Now, those words of Abraham are prophetic. He doesn't know it yet. Abraham in that moment says something that he can't put his finger on, but he says it. And as they go up, as the story unfolds, as we learn, they go up. Isaac is bound to the altar. Many people make reference to this fact that the 100-plus-year-old Abraham could not have bound Isaac if Isaac didn't willingly submit. Isaac was too young and strong and fast for his father. If he wanted to resist at all, it would have been very easy for him. He's the one that carried the wood up the mountain because Abraham was a little too feeble. And so there he allows his father to bind him. And the story unfolds. It says Abraham takes the very knife with which he's going to sacrifice his son. And as he raises the knife, the Lord calls to him and says, don't do anything to him. I know now that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham willing to go all the way to being absolutely obedient to God in this very kind of odd and unintuitive way. And yet God interrupts and says, nope, don't do it. And in fact, they look and there's a ram caught by its horns in a thicket, and this ram becomes the sacrifice because, hey, God has provided. In fact, one of the things about this story is Abraham called that place, the place where all this happened, Jehovah Jireh or Yahweh Jireh. The Lord will provide, or the Lord will see to it. On the mountain of the Lord, it says, it will be provided. And this is a very remarkable story, not just in and of itself, but because of the parallels to what happens to Jesus. Because when we think, Isaac becomes what you might call a type of Christ. Type is kind of a theological word that is used in theology or typology to say something in the Old Testament points to or foreshadows something that happens in the New Testament. And particularly here we see Isaac as a type of Christ, or as a foreshadowing of what would happen to Christ. Because like Isaac carries the wood up the mountain, Jesus would carry his cross up that mountain. As Jesus was identified as the only begotten Son of God, the beloved Son of God, so Isaac is the son of the promise, the only son, as it says, your son, your only son whom you love. As Isaac willingly submits to this moment of laying down and allowing his father to bind him on the altar, so Jesus willingly submits himself. He humbles himself, Paul says in Philippians, and becomes obedient unto death. Jesus himself says, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord. He submits to the will of the Father and allows the sacrifice to take place. And the biggest connection is that Jesus is the greatest provision that God has ever made for us. For here, the parallel to Jesus isn't just in Isaac, but it's to the ram caught in the thicket. As John the Baptist said, Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Maybe you think lamb as in Passover, which would be an appropriate parallel. Or here, the ram caught in the thicket who takes the place. The substitutionary sacrifice, the ram for Isaac. Jesus, the substitutionary sacrifice for us. The pictures here and the parallels here are very, very interesting. In fact, even the place that they go has a parallel to Mount Moriah, to the city of Jerusalem, to that place where Jesus was when he was crucified. Maybe not exactly same spot. Some people say it might be, others say maybe not. Hard to know across geography and all that, but certainly the parallels are very remarkable between this and between Jesus. And that's where this picture of the overarching story of the Bible is so compelling to me, that you see something happen way back here in the first book of the Bible, thousands of years before Jesus is on the scene. And even here, you see that the plan of God is being brought about, that the mind of God knows what he is going to do, that he knows our sinful state, and he knows that he has to make a sacrifice. He has to provide for us through the sacrifice of Jesus. And in the life of Abraham and Isaac, we see a reminder that God knows that, and he is going to take care of it. In fact, the book of Hebrews talks about this, and it says Abraham considered that he could receive Isaac back from the dead, that he could be resurrected from the dead. And in a manner of speaking, he was. In fact, that's another parallel, that Isaac, though it looked like he was dead, lives. Jesus, though he died, rose again. We just talked about that on Easter as such a cornerstone of our faith. And so as we look at this story of Abraham and Isaac, it reminds us that God knows our need, that he is the one who will provide. And we see this kind of name here attached to who God is and what he has done that sticks throughout. And there are so many stories in the scriptures where God provides, even miraculously, for the needs of his people. Maybe you have a story today. I have a few in my life where God provided for me and for my family in ways that I didn't quite understand. But through faith, God does some things that don't make sense. Just like Abraham, through faith, allowed God to use him and came to know God, I should say, in a little deeper way because of this moment. So yeah, I think this might be maybe one of our last moments with Abraham. We'll move on ahead in the story of the Bible, but this is vitally important. It foreshadows in many ways who Jesus is and what he would do, that substitutionary sacrifice on the cross, that through him is life and forgiveness. And that's what we talk about, as you know, if you've been around very much, what we talk about all the time when we get together. Who is Jesus? What does it mean that he came, that he lived, that he died, that he rose again? And what difference does it make today? Because for me, it makes all the difference. And we would love to have you join us every Sunday morning, 9 o'clock. That's what we're going to be talking about. That's who we're going to be talking about, Jesus and the love of God expressed through his life, death, and resurrection. Always love for you to join us, and certainly love for you to spend these few minutes with me on Wednesday. I'm going to take my cup of coffee. I'm going to finish it up and get back to the things on my agenda today. I will let you get back to your day, and I will look forward, hopefully, to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.